Before we start, I would like to say that there will be no spoilers in this video, and to give a viewer's discretion notice because there will be plenty of violence, gore, and language. Survival horror is one of my favorite genres in video games, and with that comes experience in many titles over the years, such as Resident Evil, Silent Hill, or the timeless classic in my opinion, Dead Space. I bring this up because the creators of Dead Space are back with a new title and studio to bring us yet another space survival horror game. But can they, or did they, overcome the mountainous expectations set by the previous success? Let's talk about it. The Callisto Protocol has a lot to live up to, but does it continue a legacy while simultaneously making a new experience to build on in the future? It does tread very familiar ground, some would say too close, even when down to the basic gameplay loop. The biggest departure from Dead Space, though, is the emphasis on melee combat. Whereas in Dead Space, melee was about the equivalent of waving your arms about wildly at an enemy, Callisto has a deeper and, dare I say, unique approach to combat. Even if it does become a bit repetitive toward the end of your adventure, combat has been basically built around a new dodge mechanic. When pressing right or left on the joystick, your character will move quickly out of the way of an enemy attack in the facing direction, with the exception of ranged attacks. Now I specifically say in the facing direction, because the combat for the most part is all about who is directly in front of you. It can sometimes be hard to engage more than one enemy at a time early on in your playthrough, but multi-enemy combat is more than possible once all upgrades have been acquired and you are more experienced with the combat itself. But for the most part, engagements are only about 1 to 4 enemies, apart from a couple areas later in the game. There are 9 enemy types strewn across the campaign, and almost all will challenge the player at one point or another, and all play a part in introducing the player to different gameplay styles and opportunities to take them down with. There are 6 weapons available in the game, 1 melee, and the rest firearms or different variations of those firearms. Toward the end of the game, there is a huge shift in combat focus though. You will almost all but forget about melee combat because gunning everything down as fast as possible becomes a necessity, as enemies are a one-hit kill, so it doesn't feel worth the risk to get up close and personal. 3 of the weapons are unmissable, while the others are missable if you aren't looking around at least a little thoroughly. But for the most part, it's as easy as veering off the beaten path to find some goodies, as the game is quite linear and you end up circling back to previous areas you once were. This aspect leads me to wonder if the intention was to make it more of an open game, but then focus was shifted to a more linear approach over the course of development. But I can't say for sure. Exploring the deepest and dankest depths of Black Iron was a fun adventure, from once bustling mining facilities and colonies that inhabited Black Iron to a kind of madhouse that you were just trying to scrape your way through. Enemies will pop out of numerous vents located around the spaces, giving you a surprise, unless you wear headphones, in which case you can hear everything coming thanks to the great sound design, and sometimes hidden enemies are in plain sight for the player to find or mistakenly stumble upon. There are only a few alternate paths in each area, but most are worth seeking out for ammo and resources. These resources can be taken to upgrade stations that are scattered through each area. Each upgrade feels substantial and gameplay altering, except for maybe your grip, as they call it, your GRP. This acts as a kind of telekinesis to pick up objects and enemies and fling them into whoever or whatever you please. No matter how much I upgraded the GRP, it never felt substantially stronger. It always felt as though I was low on energy, because there are only a few uses with each charge, but it was a helpful and fun tool to use throughout the story otherwise. As for the story, it's fine. I am not going to sit here and say that it's a total failure, but I'm certainly not going to sit here and tell you it's on another level either. It's fairly straightforward, and it isn't really anything we haven't seen before. With that being said, I did enjoy the story that was presented, even if it wasn't what I had originally hoped for. You play as Jacob Lee, a pilot of some precious cargo en route to somewhere when he and his buddy are boarded by a mysterious group of people.
We've been boarded.
These people are clearly searching for something, and
What are you gonna do? Whatever I have to. What are you doing? No! Shit!
in the scuttle for control of the ship, you crash land into planet Callisto, and back into Black Iron Prison where you had previously set off from. But this time, not as a pilot or civilian, but as a prisoner. And when things start to go crazy, it's up to Jacob and a few other characters to try and set aside their differences and work together to escape. From there is a relatively well-paced adventure through Black Iron Prison. That is until about the last third of the game. At this point, the game kind of feels rushed to the finish line, and there aren't many twists or turns left that you couldn't see a mile away. The ending of the game was handled fine, though, with it kind of being a resolute ending for some questions, while at the same time raising some new ones and leaving it open for a sequel that I do hope they eventually make. Now as for the performance of this game. I played on PlayStation 5 and there are two graphics settings for the game to play in. Performance mode, which puts the game at 60 frames per second with some loss to visual fidelity, or in quality mode with ray tracing. Now, I will be the first person to say I love my frames over graphics. But Callisto Protocol is one of the most gorgeous games I've played, and it's impressive on a technical level what they managed to achieve on console. Character models are deeply textured and intricate, with environments that pop no matter how bleak the setting. Callisto uses 3 different types of ray tracing techniques, a combination of shadows, lighting, and reflections, whereas most console games only pick one of the 3. And even a new feature called ray tracing transmission that makes the outer layer of skin and flesh on enemies and your characters look that much more realistic and grotesque by making it look a little more translucent. Now, with all that being said, Callisto has released in a much more unstable and some might say unplayable state on other platforms. There are mentions of some ray tracing features missing from Xbox version, and PC has seen multiple updates to fix various texture streaming issues that make the game stutter and basically unplayable. I've seen multiple updates roll out for other platforms on Twitter already, so hopefully these issues will be fixed very soon. But I gotta tell ya, I never thought Striking Distance and Glenn Schofield would let this happen. I am tired of seeing so many unfinished games being fixed later and using us players as beta testers to fix or even come up with all the things that should have really been ironed out before launch. I had hoped we would dodge this outcome with Callisto, but here we are.
This is supposed to be just another fucking job. This is crazy.
So, final thoughts. Callisto reuses a lot of the ideas pioneered by Dead Space. From the bench-like upgrade system to your character stomping everything into oblivion, to wandering the dilapidated prison with your GRP, just like Isaac in the Ishimura with his telekinesis. Where Callisto distances itself is in the type of story, its combat, and its level design. If Dead Space was the Alien of video games, bringing a new unique vision and setting a bar for future games, then the Callisto Protocol is the Alien 3 of those movies, with some of the best things we remember about the space horror gore fest but without the soul or longevity it needs to set itself apart. The biggest departure of being melee combat, and the emphasis on it, is the biggest thing that sets it apart. But like I said, Callisto all but abandons that melee combat 2/3 into the game, which took away from the horror aspect, as I felt very powerful in respect to every other enemy, with the exception of a few bosses that would just one-shot you if you wandered too close. All that, and put in the fact that PC player and Xbox players are having so many issues at launch, and you have a recipe for disaster. And sadly, I feel many will skip this title, even though it has plenty to show and plenty to dismember and ogle over, because it's one of the best looking games I've played. Now, if I was to give this game a score, I would probably land on a solid 7 out of 10. It's not bad by any means, but it is a bit disappointing. And probably the biggest disappointment just in the fact that we expected a lot, and maybe that was the issue. Maybe our expectations of wanting a Dead Space 4 or, just another Dead Space was simply too much to ask for. But maybe not. Maybe in the future, Striking Distance decides to build on Callisto and build on the world and weapons and combat and everything we really need out of a game from them and a successor to Dead Space. And maybe we'll see what the potential of this game really looks like in the future. But until then, it's a solid release and a solid time. And I would recommend grabbing it when it's a bit discounted, as I can't really justify a $70 price tag for a 9 to 12 hour game at best. And when it comes to replayability, it's all but not there, as all cutscenes are unskippable and there is no variation in what you'll be doing other than maybe picking up a few collectibles that you missed along the way.
Got it.
That has been my review of the Callisto Protocol. Like the video if you enjoyed this conversation. Subscribe if you would like to see more and keep up with the different videos I upload each week. Thanks for coming by. I do enjoy making these videos. And please, leave a comment and let me know what your thoughts are on this. And maybe I'll see you next time.